Hi, I'm Dan Aubuchon, and welcome back to the Joy of Tennis Teaching. Last week, we talked about the first three dimensions: get it in, dimension 1, direction, dimension 2, and depth, dimension 3. Today, we're going to talk about number 4, spin, and number 5, power. So let's talk about spin. Players who learn to master spin will add a lot to their game, but many club players are afraid of spin. They don't really understand it, and they don't know how to create it, and they do like a poor job when they try to spin the ball. So they just stick to the more basic get it in and control direction and depth. But spin is a lot of fun, and what we want to learn is we want to learn what the spins are, how they react in the air, and what they do to the flight of the ball and the bounce of the ball, and then how we deal with those things. And then we'll also talk a little bit about how to create these spins. So on the ground strokes, there are two spins. There's underspin, where the ball rotates backwards. Some people call this backspin. Backspin and underspin are the same thing. So if you hear me switch back and forth, those terms mean exactly the same thing. And then there's topspin, where the ball rotates forward. Unfortunately, topspin, some players feel like you're going over the top of the ball. You're not doing that. If your racket contacts the top of the ball will go straight down. Topspin is created by hitting the back of the ball, but brushing up or having the racket face leave the ball going forward. So that's what happens to create the flight of the ball. Topspin will have a high arcing flight, and when it bounces, it will tend to bounce up very high. Underspin or backspin will go on a more flat trajectory. It might rise up a little bit, but then it will head low, and when it hits the court, it will hit at a low trajectory, and so it will bounce out low. And even though the ball will bounce with forward spin after it hits the ground, because of the angle of the bounce, it will tend to bounce very low. So if you're playing somebody that's hitting underspin or backspin, get ready to play a low ball and move forward. If you're playing somebody who hits heavy topspin, back up to play that ball, or at least be ready to play it in a higher contact area. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about how to create that spin. To create the underspin, you want to hit it flat, but make sure the lower edge of your racket goes forward. So that will create the underspin like that, and we want to create the underspin like there, and we want to create the underspin there. And so the idea of that underspin is that when you hit it, that ball will go forward and low. With topspin, we're going to go ahead and let our racket head drop down, and when we strike the ball, we're going to try to strike it with a perpendicular racket face and hit the back of the ball and brush up, and that creates the topspin. If you were watching carefully on the camera, it looked like those balls were going down with the trajectory, and they were. And that's because I was starting at this height. For real topspin, to create that arc, I would start with my racket face more below the ball and get it to hit. So that's the spin for the ground strokes: underspin and topspin. On the serve, we've got 3 types of spin, and we'll deal with those in another episode where we're talking more about the 5 dimensions in the serve. But go out there and understand what happens with the spin. Now, I want to talk one more thing about spin, and that's the word slice. If you're watching on TV, you'll hear the commentators say slice backhand. If you're listening to more experienced players, they will say, oh, you've got a good slice backhand. And you might be going, geez, Dan taught me that was underspin or backspin. It is. Slice is an incorrect term for a ground stroke. A slicing ball, if you've ever played golf, the slice will go to the right or to the left. And on a serve, when we hit a serve, it will curve to the right or the left, depending on if you're right or left-handed. I believe it became the habit of calling an underspin ball a slice because the motion that you're making is kind of slicing into the ball. But it's actually a very incorrect term. So, you can go out there and correct the pro who tells you that's a slice backhand. Say, actually, it's underspin. There was a very famous coach once who came out and he was talking about an underslice backhand. And Jack Groppel, one of the top tennis teachers and biomechanists in the world, came out of the room and was so upset. And he said, what's he going to now start calling topspin overslice? And so the idea is we want to understand the terms and be accurate if you're a teacher. Don't confuse your students by teaching them an underspin backhand is slice, and then you'll teach them a slice serve and they'll be confused because the spins are very, very different. Dimension number 5, power. This is where a lot of guys want to jump to right away, maybe before they get dimension 1. It's fun to hit the ball hard, but we have to understand the reason the 5 dimensions are in the order they're in is because when you get to number 5, power, you should have great control of all of the others, because no matter who you are, if you're hitting with more power, you're going to bring more mistakes back into the game. Your margin for error becomes smaller. So if you're trying to develop power in your game, here's the most important thing to remember. Don't worry about mistakes. Make mistakes. Go ahead and hit the ball out. It doesn't really matter. Hit it hard into the net. Learn to correct the elements of the stroke afterwards. But to understand the power, what we have to understand is what creates the power. And what creates speed of the ball when you're playing tennis is only 2 things. The speed of the incoming ball and the speed of your racket. That's it. Those 2 things are what create the speed on any shot, the power of any shot. So on a serve, we talk about being very loose and using your wrist because there's no incoming speed of the ball. The ball is just sitting there. But when you're playing a ground stroke and your opponent hits a very hard, solid shot at you, you can hit it back to them with as much or more power with less effort putting it in. So you don't have to swing wildly hard to create speed and power on the ground strokes. The best ways to get more power on your ground stroke are, number 1, make better contact. Slow your swing down, line your racket up, develop the coordination to make good, consistent contact. That way you'll get the most out of the minimum potential of the natural rebound of the ball against the strings. The second way to get better power without swinging hard is learn to be better balanced. Because if you have good balance and your body rotation is good and you maintain your balance, you will increase the racket speed at contact without throwing yourself off, without losing control of the racket. And then the final step is learn to swing the racket a little harder. On your ground strokes, especially your forehand, maybe you'll relax your grip a little bit more to add some risk to the ball. Maybe you'll learn to take a little bit bigger backswing so you can accelerate the racket more. Try all of these steps, but be ready to back off if you're making too many errors. So remember, power is dimension 5, and we want to learn that one after we've mastered the other 4. So thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. If you can add some spin and some power to your game, you will really enjoy your tennis more. Go out there and be joyful.